crushed by ice. The impossible survival of the Endurance. It is considered the greatest survival story in human history. In 1914, a British explorer named Sir Ernest Shackleton set out for Antarctica. He wanted to be the first man to cross the frozen continent on foot. He had a brave crew and a strong ship called the Endurance. But they never even touched the land. Before they could reach the shore, disaster struck. The ocean froze around them. Their ship was crushed like a wooden matchbox. 28 men were left stranded on a floating sheet of ice. They were thousands of miles from civilization, with no radio and no hope of rescue. This is the story of how they survived for 634 days in hell. Chapter 1. The Trap. The mission was doomed from the start. As the Endurance sailed into the Weddell Sea, the temperature dropped. The sea ice was unusually thick that year. The ship pushed forward, breaking through the pack. But on January 19, 1915, the ice stopped moving. The ship was stuck fast. Shackleton waited for the spring thaw to free them. But the ice didn't melt. It squeezed harder. For 10 months, the ship groaned under the pressure. Finally, the hull snapped. Water poured in. The majestic ship was crushed and sank beneath the ice. The men stood on the frozen ocean and watched their home disappear. They were now homeless in the coldest place on Earth. They had 3 small lifeboats, some food, and their sled dogs. But the ice beneath their feet was drifting away from land. Chapter 2. The Voyage of the James Caird. For months they camped on the drifting ice floes. They lived on seal meat and hope. Finally, the ice began to break up under them. They launched their 3 tiny lifeboats into the freezing ocean. For 7 days, they battled massive waves and dehydration. They finally landed on Elephant Island. It was the first time they had stood on solid ground in 497 days. But Elephant Island was a desolate rock. No ships ever passed there. They would slowly starve to death if they stayed. Shackleton made a desperate choice. He took 5 men and the strongest lifeboat, the James Caird. He planned to sail 800 miles across the roughest ocean in the world, to reach a whaling station on South Georgia Island. It was a suicide mission. The boat was only 22 feet long. The waves were 60 feet high. They faced hurricane winds and freezing spray that turned to ice on the deck. But miraculously, after 16 days of terror, they spotted land. Chapter 3. The Final Trek. But the nightmare wasn't over. They had landed on the wrong side of the island. The whaling station was on the other side. Between them stood jagged mountains and glaciers that no human had ever crossed. Shackleton and 2 others began to climb. They had no climbing gear, only ropes and screws pushed into their boots for grip. They marched for 36 hours without sleep. They slid down glaciers in the dark, not knowing if a cliff was at the bottom. Finally, they heard a steam whistle. It was the whaling station. They stumbled into the town, looking like wild men with long beards and ragged clothes. The station manager looked at them and asked, "Who the hell are you?" Shackleton replied, "My name is Shackleton." He immediately sent a ship back to Elephant Island to rescue the others. Conclusion. It took 4 attempts to punch through the ice to reach Elephant Island, but on August 30th, 1916, Shackleton returned. He counted the figures on the beach through his binoculars. He turned to his crew and said the famous words, "They are all there." Every single one of the 28 men survived. Not a life was lost. In 2022, modern explorers found the wreck of the Endurance at the bottom of the sea. It was perfectly preserved by the cold water, a frozen monument to the greatest leader who ever lived. Question for the audience. Shackleton failed his main goal, but saved his men. Do you consider him a success or a failure? Let me know in the comments.